The new Apple Silicon Macs are just incredible when it comes to power efficiency and pure performance, but in a lot of ways, they are a downgrade compared to their Intel Macs. They have limitations that either most people don't know about or choose to ignore. Limitations that could possibly be a deal breaker for you. I use my 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook and I love it. It's been putting my Hackintosh to shame in certain workflows. But to tell you the truth, it's not all roses and sunshine. There are some issues and limitations that you should be aware of to make a sound and informed buying decision. This was one of the first issues reported by early users of M1 Macs. Some of them noticed that when they use Mac built-in smart reporting tool to check the total bytes written, TBW, to and from their SSD, it had reached a level that would mean it would hit the maximum covered by Mac's warranty within a few months. This was blamed on the fact that the M1 makes greater use of swapping data between the RAM and the SSD compared to the Intel Macs. Some of the worst cases highlighted on Twitter and community forums indicated that some SSDs had consumed up to 13% of the maximum warrantable total bytes written, TBW. This kind of excessive usage would mean the lifespan of the M1 Mac would be as little as 2 years. The more data you write on an SSD, the faster it will slow down and eventually stop working. Internal storage for M1 Macs is soldered to the logic board, meaning you can't pop to the shop and buy a new one. You'd need a whole new MacBook. Recent macOS updates claim to fix this issue, but it remains to be seen how many Apple Silicon SSDs will fail before their time. When the M1 chip was released, Apple changed the way we think about RAM on our Macs. As in the iPhone and the iPad, the memory was now affixed on the same package as the system on chip. The M1 Pro and M1 Max come with a higher memory option, but the M1 tops only at 16 GB, and that's it. And some users have discovered that even when they have lots of RAM, some applications like to grab much of it for themselves. This is called memory leak. Therefore, the program consuming the memory cannot release it back to the OS to be reallocated. This would mean that performance would gradually deteriorate until you need to either wait for the RAM to clear, force quit the app, or restart the whole machine. Sometimes a warning will appear when no single app is even using that much memory. And other times, apps are seemingly using way more memory than it's available. It's possible that macOS isn't managing this unified memory structure properly and will continue to allocate RAM beyond what is available without freeing up the RAM that is no longer needed. Again, like the SSD wear issue, it was claimed that recent macOS update fixed this. But in my personal experience with the M1 Pro, I didn't see any big improvement, and I still get those annoying warnings. Sadly, the move from Intel to Apple Silicon meant that it was no longer possible to create a boot camp partition on a Mac. As Intel Macs use the same hardware, it was simple to provide a way to install Windows on a Mac using Boot Camp. Apple Silicon is a whole different hardware platform, and one for which Windows isn't designed, so Boot Camp is no longer possible. Boot Camp, without a doubt, used to be the best way to play Windows games on a Mac or run professional programs like Katya that are not available on Mac, and it performed better than any virtualization software. Since the different operating systems don't run simultaneously, all of your Mac hardware resources were allocated to Windows application. However, you can still run Windows on a Mac using a virtualization software like Parallel Desktop, but it's not an ideal solution like you will see next. The lack of Boot Camp on Apple Silicon Macs was bad enough, but the fact that virtualization software can only run on ARM versions of Windows 11 makes it even worse. There is no way to install x86 versions of Windows or Windows apps on M1 and M2 Macs. Currently, Parallels is the most popular virtualization software you can use to run Windows on Apple Silicon Mac, but it comes with some drawbacks. Parallels is a more expensive choice than Boot Camp, since you have to purchase the Parallel program, of course. Some individuals may find that Parallel options involve a steeper learning curve compared to Boot Camp. Parallel is also an entirely distinct program with far more settings and preferences to learn. In contrast, Boot Camp involves a more direct setup. Parallels also strain your Mac processing power and memory, as both the operating systems are working at the same time compared to Boot Camp. You'll be limited in terms of what Windows games you can play and what applications you can use on an ARM version of Windows 11, which is disappointing considering that virtualization on Intel Macs provided endless possibilities. Not to mention the fact that you could also run the full-fledged version of Windows on Intel Macs using Boot Camp. The CPU and the GPU on Apple Silicon Mac share the same memory. It's better optimized, especially for applications that are made specifically for Macs. But in terms of performance, it cannot compete with a discrete GPU, or even some of the mobile GPUs like an RTX lineup from NVIDIA. Yes, discrete GPUs consume more power, but their performance is much better. If you're a casual user, you probably won't notice any difference, as you can edit photos and videos without facing any problems on any M1 or M2 Mac. But if you do any kind of professional 3D or VFX work, you might need extra graphical performance. This was not an issue with Intel Macs, since you can simply put an external GPU, eGPU, to your Thunderbolt port and boom, you get performance that you need. With Apple Silicon Macs, this is simply not possible. The reason why eGPUs do not function on macOS with Apple Silicon is because there are no Apple Silicon compatible AMD drivers. I think it's highly unlikely that we will see them support eGPUs in the future, since none of the Apple ARM SoCs support PCI Express GPUs. There is a chip limitation by design. They also completely removed discrete GPU support from ARM macOS kernel and the OS frameworks. Now that I outlined all of those issues, I have to emphasize the fact that these might not be a concern for a lot of regular Mac users. It's been reported that some of them have already been fixed by recent macOS updates, like I told you before. To be clear, I'm not saying don't buy an Apple Silicon Mac. I'm simply informing you of some of the issues and limitations so you can be informed before spending your hard-earned cash. One of the things that really inspired me to make this video is the number of people messaging me on social asking for help with their Mac, like adding an eGPU or using Boot Camp. It's very sad for me to have to tell them it's not gonna work, maybe ever. One specific case that I still remember was a guy who sold his M1 MacBook and bought an Intel Mac because his music production peripherals were not supported by Apple Silicon. So I hope you find this video useful, but do let me know in the comments below. Were you aware of these issues or not, and which kind of Mac do you have currently? Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.